Hi everyone, and welcome to this chapter of the free full stack course. In the previous chapter, we've set up our user so that we can log in with an email and password combination instead of username and password. And that's going to help us be a little bit more streamlined, just like many other services out there and APIs out there that you usually don't log in with a username. It's usually the email that is the unique key for logging in, and of course the password combination. In this particular video, what we're going to do is to go ahead and work with JWT tokens. So we're going to issue an access token to whoever is trying to log into our system with a valid email and password combination. So we're going to issue them a token, which is our access token, and then we're going to issue them a refresh token. For those of you who are not familiar with tokens, I will just explain how it actually works. So when you set up your token management on Django or any other backend, for instance, if you're using Express or if you're using Nest.js, for instance, a user attempts to log into the system. If the credentials are correct, then the server is going to issue a pretty much like not really random, but it's going to issue some characters that if you look at them, they look random, but they actually contain some very valid information in the characters. Along with this token that we're going to issue, we're also going to issue a refresh token. Now, how it works is that when then a client is trying to access our server, a protected resource, for instance, such as their profile information, we will on the back end protect that endpoint with an access token. So whoever wants to access that endpoint needs to provide not only their access token, but also that user should have the credentials to be able to access that resource. For instance, I wouldn't be able to make a post request or a put request on your profile. So user A shouldn't be able to change user B's profile and vice versa. So there's authentication, and also there's you need to know whether a person is authorized. So authorization and authentication are two different things. So authentication is the process of you actually signing in to a service, and authorization is the backend determining whether you have the privileges in order to do something that you're trying to do. Okay, but don't worry about it. We'll talk more about it soon. But in this video, the focus really is just to go from what we've built on up to this point, in that we've added the email and a password combination. And now we want to allow a user to hit our backend with that email and password combination. And then with like a post API, and then we accept that information, and then if everything is correct, if the email and password combination is correct, then we're going to issue the user an access token and a refresh token. Now, I understand for some of you, maybe access token or refresh token may be completely new topics, but just for now, know that this is our way of authenticating a user into our system and giving them a token using which they can carry out other operations on our backend. Okay, just know that. So it's as if I have a restaurant, you come to the restaurant and you say, hey, I booked a table, and then I give you a token. If you've already booked your table and everything's set, I'll give you a token, and using that token, you can go into the restaurant and buy your food. However, if you come to the door and say, I haven't booked a table, or here's my name, can you see if I've booked a table? Then I look at the list and I'm like, nope, you haven't. Okay. And then you won't be authenticated. So you won't be able to go into the restaurant. So it's kind of like that. So we're trying to basically authenticate users coming in to our server. And if you followed all the chapters up to this point, you know that we've already created a user, which is called admin@admin.com. And so that's the email, and the password was also set to admin. So that was a super user that we've created, and we haven't created any other users up to this point. So, but that will suffice. So that will just suffice for proving the point of creating a JWT tokens. Okay. For this video, we're also going to use a specific library for our tokens, and it is called actually Django REST Framework Simple JWT. And it is, as its name indicates, it is a very simple library to set up and also to use. So there's very little configuration required from our side. So what you need to do is just to search for Django REST Framework Simple JWT on the internet, and you will end up with this beautiful website. And so it will tell you everything that you need to do from the beginning to the end. But I will walk you through this, and we will do all of this together actually, so you don't have to do it yourself. So let's bring up our course backend in here. So this is our code, basically what we've created so far. Okay. And we're just going to go through these steps together. The first thing that you can see, it says pip install Django REST framework simple JWT. So let's go into our terminal. I'm going to close this terminal, and then I'm going to create a new one and ensure that you're in your virtual environment. Okay. So Visual Studio Code already does that for you. If you followed these steps up to this point, we created a virtual environment using Visual Studio Code using venv, and that should be activated before you do any pip commands in here. And not only pip commands, but actually Python. So if you're running Python, you need to ensure that you're in your virtual environment. Okay. So virtual environment activated, and in here we're just going to say pip install, and then oops, pip install was already part of what I copy and pasted. So let's say Django REST framework simple JWT. Okay. And we can see that has been installed now. Okay. So that was the first step. The next thing that we need to do is to go to project configuration, so we don't have to do this part, okay, with the custom cryptographic dependencies. That's optional, as you can see. Now we go into our settings and we add this into settings. So let's go settings pi, and we look for what we already have. Let's have a look. Do we have anything related to REST stuff? And we don't actually. Okay, so let's add that in. So we're gonna go after installed application. Actually, maybe after all of this, perhaps almost at the end, we say REST framework, and we remove these triple dots from here, here, and here. Okay. So now we have just a REST framework key in here, and you can see this is the default authentication class is JWT authentication. All right. So that's added in our settings.py now. We're good to go there. Then what we need to do is to go ahead and actually provide our two endpoints, one for retrieving a token pair, which is our access token and refresh token. And the other one is for refreshing our token using a refresh token. I'll explain this more soon. However, this is very important because it's telling us that to put this somewhere. So you can see this is for the URL's py file. So you be now thinking, okay, but we have a backend here, which is the root of our server. We have products, we have users. Where should we put this? I mean, it is working with tokens. So we don't have at the moment any application that is really logically responsible for issuing tokens to our end users. So what we could do is to go ahead and create a new application. And the way to do that is Python, manage py, and we say start app, and let's call it authtokens. Okay. So this is just a name that we're making up on the spot. So it doesn't necessarily have to be authtokens, but it just makes sense to create an application called authtokens that takes care of authentication tokens, okay, and authentication in general. So let's issue this command, and you'll see now there is a new application in here called authtokens. All right, and it doesn't have the urls.py, so we cannot go from our backend. You see, backend has URLs, but we cannot go from here into here. We haven't linked them together yet. You see this auth in here, and this is part of the REST framework, which we've already set up, but we're going to delete this soon. So let's actually not say soon, but let's just delete this right now. I wonder, let's keep it until we come back to this URLs patterns, okay? Let's go into settings py and register our auth tokens. Is that what we call it? Auth tokens application. And the reason behind this really is that if you create an application in Django, you need to ensure that you're installing it. Just creating the application doesn't suffice. You need to tell Django where it actually exists and where it has to retrieve the configuration for that application. Okay, so let's go and into settings.py, and let's go into our installed applications on top, and we can remove these comments as well on top. We don't need them. Okay. Let's go into installed apps and tell it that we have a new application called authtokens, I believe we call it, right? Authtokens. So let's say we have authtokens. Authtokens is the name of the app, and then it says apps authtokens.config. And here be a little bit careful, because you can see the default config of authtokens. If you go into its apps py, you can see tokens is spelled with lowercase t. We're going to change this to uppercase T, but we leave the application name as authtokens. It's just a config. We want it to say authtokens, okay? And this is something you don't have to do, but I think it makes more sense because there are two different words, auth and tokens, and for for the casing to be correct, I think it's necessary that we make T uppercase. Okay, so auth tokens, let's save this file, and we just copy this name and we go in here and paste it so we don't make any mistakes. Okay, so our application is now installed, you can say. All right, so that's really good. After we've done that, let's go into our backend and into URLs. And then we're going to get rid of this auth from here, okay? Because we already have an auth. Our goal in here is so that anyone goes into our server, like say localhost 8000, and we want them to be able to do like this /auth/, okay? And in here, we want them to basically, we want them to be able to just say auth/, and this would be the endpoint for retrieving an access token. So you would send your email and password to this guy, and then you would retrieve your authentication tokens. And we also want localhost 8000 auth and then refresh to be the endpoint for actually refreshing your token. So remember auth/, and this will be a post call, and this will also be a post call. Okay, so it is important that we remove this from here and we start delegating anything that is auth/ to our auth tokens URLs. Okay, and auth tokens is the name of our application, auth tokens. Okay, and let's just say namespace. What should we decide in here? Let's call it auth tokens because that's the name of the application actually. Okay. So that is urls.py inside our backend. So we're now delegating anything that has to do with auth/ into our auth tokens application. However, we're not done really yet because auth tokens in here doesn't have urls.py set up yet. So let's copy what we have in urls.py inside backend and close this guy, and settings.py we can keep. Then ensure that you go into auth tokens folder and right click on it, say new file, and we say urls.py. And we just paste what we had in urls.py inside our backend, but we're going to clean it up. Okay, so like this. So keep it like this. Then we're going to go into the documentation and start working with these. You can see it says from REST framework simple JWT.views. Import these things. I mean, we can copy paste these, but I think it is sometimes important that we type things by hand as well, so we don't feel like robots that we're just copy pasting code. So, and it's good for learning as well. So we say from simple JWT, actually, what was it? REST framework. So from REST framework, simple JWT, and I think it was views import, and it was like a pair. And then we say it is token obtain pair view and token refresh view. Token obtain pair view and token refresh view. Okay, so the next thing that we have to do in here is to go into our URL patterns, and we say we had our path. Oops, I keep typing in the wrong window. And then we say we had a path in here, and the first path we were gonna say it's empty, right? And if you look at the documentation, it says, okay, in here you could say API token, but we said that we don't want actually any path in here, because remember again, we want HTTP, or sorry, localhost, our port 8000, for instance, auth/ to be this guy. So we want auth/ to actually retrieve our token for us. Okay, so the urls.py in backend has already taken care of this thing, the auth/ section. So if you go in here, you can see auth/ already comes to our auth tokens. So after this, we don't want anything. We just want an empty path. All right. So this is what we're trying to take care of in here. Okay. So that's going to be our path. And then we're going to say this guy wants to work with token obtain pair view. So let's say token obtain pair view as view. And this is something that we've already learned from the previous chapter, that we have to say as view, okay? And then we say the name, let's call it token obtain pair. That was a good suggestion by GitHub Copilot. Then the next API, or the next endpoint, is going to be a post to our server 8000 auth/refresh/. Okay, and this is something that we decide. I mean, you can just call it R if you want to, but it doesn't make so much sense to call it R. And in the documentation, you can also see it is called refresh/, but it is completely up to you what you want to call it. Okay, so we say path and we say refresh/. It should use this view, token refresh view. Let's say token refresh view, as view, and let's just call it token refresh as well. So now we've taken care of these. Okay, good stuff. Let's close this and let's keep settings.py in here. Now let's see what it says in here. You can also include a route for simple if you wish to allow API users to verify. No, we don't need that. Now this is very important. It says if you wish to use localization translation. Actually, no, it's not this one that is very important. I don't want to do this right now, okay? And let's also ensure that we've added our application. Did we have to add anything to the installed apps? Installed apps REST framework. If you wish to use localization translation, simply add. No, that's not what we want to do, okay? And now you see, after doing all of this, it goes into usage, but in my opinion, at least, we're not really done yet. We shouldn't really go ahead and test this yet because we need to do the settings. So on the left-hand side of this simple JWT documentation, you see a section that is called settings. So please go into settings now, and you can see that it says, go ahead and add these things to your settings .py file. Okay, so let's copy this, excuse me, from date time import time delta, and let's go on top of our settings file and add this. Then we go and copy this entire section, which is the simple JWT applications or libraries settings, and we put it at the very end of our settings .py file. There are a few things that we're going to change in here, okay? And one of those is, actually there are 5 settings that we're going to change. The access token lifetime. We don't want our access tokens just to be valid for 5 minutes because that is very short. In my opinion, 60 minutes is good actually. Now, when you get an access token, let's just say that it is valid for 30 days. Okay, so we say it's valid for 30 days, and after 30 days, then you have to refresh it. All right, and this is completely up to you. You need to think yourself. You can say that, yeah, actually, sorry, not the access token. I mean in here, the refresh token. So the refresh token is valid for 30 days. And if you haven't refreshed your access token in 30 days, meaning that you haven't logged into our system for 30 days, then you have to log back in from the beginning. Do you understand what I mean? I mean, like if, let's just say that you're a normal user, you come into our application and you're using the app, you have an access token, and you know that access token is valid for 60 minutes. Actually, as a normal user, you wouldn't know that, but as a person who's written the backend, you'll know that. It's valid for 60 minutes. Then you send the application to the background, and after 3 minutes, you bring it back to the foreground. Then our application is gonna look at and I mean the application, I mean like our Flutter application or Rust application, is gonna look at the lifetime of this access token and say, oh, it's still valid. It's still valid for like 50 something more minutes. Then I'm gonna send the same access token to the backend with an endpoint and everything should work. However, let's say that you send the application to the background for 2 hours and then bring it up to the foreground. Then our application wants to make an API call and it says, oh, 2 hours have gone. The access token has been invalidated, meaning that it has expired. How long do I have on my refresh token? It was like, oh, 30 days from the beginning and now has gone like 2 hours. So we still have 29 and more, 29 and a half days, almost more actually, but not exactly 30 days. So it uses the refresh token. It goes into our /refresh endpoint and it will refresh the access token, and we get a new access token that is still valid for 60 minutes. However, if you send the application to the background for more than a month, and then you open the app again from beginning, the app looks at the access token, oh, it has definitely expired. It looks at the refresh token, oops, it has also definitely expired. There is no way for that application to recover your authentication, so the app will send you to a login page. It says you haven't logged into this application for so long that you have to log back in. Okay, so that's how this access token and refresh token pair kind of work. Refresh token is used to get a new access token for you. And then the access token is used in order to authenticate with our backend with different endpoints. Okay. Now, rotating refresh tokens, what we're going to do is going to say true in here, perhaps. Okay. And then true in here and true in here. What's going to happen in here is that we're going to say blacklist after rotation. Okay. So what these settings are going to do is that, for instance, is actually we can go into the documentation instead of me explaining all of this. We can go in here. You can say when it's set to true, if the if the refresh token is submitted, a new refresh token will be returned along with the new access token. This new refresh token will be supplied via a refresh key in the JSON response. New refresh tokens will have a renewed expiration time, which is determined by adding the time delta setting. But what this really means is that it's gonna invalidate our and blacklist our refresh tokens after it has rotated them. So, but to be honest with you, it is a little bit technical, and I think it will go outside the scope of this course right now, but we will come back to it soon. Just know that you need to add these settings to true for now, at least for this course that we're going through together, okay? After doing this, we need to ensure, you see, if you look at the documentation for a blacklist after rotation, it says if you set this to true, you need to go and add this application to the list of your installed apps. Okay, so copy this guy, REST Framework Simple JWT Token Blacklist, and go into our installed apps on top, and let's just add this guy in here. All right. Okay. So that's added now as well, and I think pretty much that was the last setting that we had to change. After we're done making these changes, it is actually time to go ahead and test this all out, okay? And let's just double check that we've installed our authtokens application in here with the correct casing of the T, and that if we go into our authtokens, that we have our URL set up. However, one thing that I can see in here is that we haven't set up our app name in here. If you remember from our products, for instance, we had inside URLs our app name set up. So let's go ahead and set up the app name for our, where was it? It was in here for our auth tokens URLs. So we go in here and we say app name, and we call it auth tokens. Okay, good. I think we're pretty much done with the setup. So we can close all these, and we can close the Explorer as well and open up a terminal. And before going ahead and testing this all out, we need to ensure that we've made our migrations and then we've migrated, because adding all these things to our applications, if you go to settings py, and we added this guy in here, REST Framework Simple JWT Token Blacklist, and we also added our own application in here. So we need to ensure that we're making our migrations and then migrating. Otherwise, things won't work as you'd expect. So let's say make migrations, and then we say migrate, and this is the one that is going to actually do some work. Okay, you can see it added this token blacklist migration for us. After doing all of this, now we should be able to go ahead and say run server, and our server is running. So let me bring up a window in which we actually hit our backend. So I bring it up in here, and you can see by default it is going to the root, and we don't have a root set up. So let's just go ahead and say / and then we will first go into our admin page, and in here we say admin@admin.com, and then admin, and this is this admin interface, and this is nothing new for us. Okay, we've done this before. I just want to ensure that we have our admin user, and then we say login, and you can see that we can successfully log in here. Okay, I'm gonna close this. However, we're gonna go now to our auth in here and say auth / and you can see that we get to our documentation. So our auth / endpoint has been set up correctly. However, in here it says that you cannot do a get on this endpoint. Okay, get is not allowed. And we also have auth / refresh / and you can see that this endpoint's also looking fine. And I can see the screen as completely dark, and that is because I have an extension in Chrome that does this for me. However, if you're viewing this on a Safari window, it will look like this. Okay, so it will look like this for you, perhaps token refresh. All right. So what we need to do now is to go ahead, and you can actually see that you can make that API call right here. So if you go into, for instance, auth, and you go into just /, you can send your email and password in here and actually test your API right here. So let's say admin@admin.com, and the password is admin, and we post it. And you can see now you get a refresh token and an access token successfully. All right. So this is really cool. It's actually working right here in the browser. However, for those of you who are interested, you can also go ahead and test this with some sort of an API testing suite, for instance, Postman, or you could also use Insomnia, which is also very, very popular. So let's test this out in Postman. I'm going to press the plus button to create a new API in here. Ensure that you're changing the changing the method to post. And we're going to say localhost, and our endpoint is actually set up on port 8000. Sorry, our service is set up on port 8000. Oops. And then I'm going to go ahead and say slash, and let's say auth, and then slash. All right. Then we're going to go into, so this is a post auth, and then let's go into body. And inside this body, let's see, none. Let's say that we have URL encoded raw binary, and let's say, I wonder if you should say send form data perhaps. Let's say email is admin@admin.com. And then for password, we're going to say admin. Okay. And then we press the send button. And now you can also see that we can get our token from our backend. You can see it's a refresh token and this is our access token. Okay. So it is working exactly as expected. Now, how do we test the refresh endpoint? So we tested the auth endpoint, but we haven't tested the refresh endpoint. And the way to do that is to copy your refresh token in here, knowing that the goal of the refresh endpoint is to take a refresh token and give you a new access token. So then you have to have a refresh token as your input. Okay. You can actually test this out. So if you go in here and copy your access token incorrectly, okay, incorrectly, not that the access token is incorrect. I mean that the access token is not the right input for the refresh endpoint. So we copy this guy. Let's just copy it and test it out. Okay. Then we go into our refresh endpoint, and we have to pass a parameter in here called refresh, and we disable the email and password. Okay. And for the refresh token, incorrectly, we paste the access token instead. Now this should give us an error. You can see it says token has wrong type, token not valid. All right. And this is exactly as we expected. And now if you do this, you've pretty much lost your access token, and the refresh token is not correct either. So let's disable this. Let's go ahead and get a new access token with our email and password. And this time around, we're going to copy the refresh token correctly. Okay. And then we go into our refresh endpoint, disable email and password. And for the refresh parameter, we're going to actually pass an actual refresh token. If you do this, then you can see you get a new access token and a new refresh token. So after doing that, this refresh token is not valid anymore. So if you make the same API call one more time, you can see it says token is blacklisted. Simply means that you cannot use the same refresh token more than once in order to get a new access token. If this happens, then you need to log back in. So that refresh token that you had and your access token is pretty much gone now, at least in this space that we're working. In an actual application, we're probably still holding on to our correct access token and refresh token. So let's send that email and password. All right, we have to send it to the auth endpoint. We send them over. We get a refresh token and an access token. Let's copy our refresh token. Okay, we copy that and we go into the refresh endpoint, and then we disable email and password parameters. We send a refresh parameter and we paste our refresh token in here. We send it, and you can see we get a new access token and a refresh token. We can copy the new refresh token to make the same API call, and we paste it in here, and then we get a new access token and refresh token, just like that. Okay. So that was really all we had to do, and congratulations. Now you have a working user model in your application, in your backend, that takes email and password, and you've now been able to transform your application or your backend into a backend that can work with JWT tokens and refresh tokens as well. And this is completely essential for bringing a modern application to the market if you're doing an iOS application or Android application, whatever you're doing. And we're going to later go ahead and take advantage of all this functionality that we've developed inside our backend using Flutter and Rust, of course. But for now, just I think I need to tell you congratulations for doing all of this work. And as I've mentioned in some other videos before, if you get stuck at any of these steps, please join the Discord server for for our course, and you can find the link for the Discord server in the actual playlist for the free full stack course. And if you have any problems, just please let me know in the Discord server and I will do my best to help you out. I hope that you enjoyed this video, but before we close off, let's go ahead and commit our changes. So stop the server, and then we have a look at Git status. We can see our settings and URLs have changed, and we also added the auth tokens application. So let's say git add all, and we, git add all, and git log, step 5. So let's go ahead and add step 6, okay? Let me say step 6, and we say add auth tokens application plus JWT tokens. All right, and that's sufficient for this point in time, and then we push our changes. And as you know, the GitHub repository is also available for our course, and you can find the link to this GitHub repository as well at the bottom of the screen inside the descriptions of this video. Hope you enjoyed this video. Any questions, let me know please, and I hope to see you in the next one.